topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello, and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I'm a core alignment coach, an emotional wisdom training specialist, and a diversity educator. And I've had the great fortune to have lived in different places and met people from many different backgrounds. And I always learn from every conversation and new perspective. And I feel like that's the greatest education I can have in this lifetime. And I have developed different programs to help other people communicate across differences who weren't moved around a lot. And because a lot of people find it helpful. And I also have developed trainings and coach individuals and groups and organizations on how to step out of patterns of bias and cultivate new patterns so that more and more people are included, which brings joy to more and more people. My website is knowwhatyouwantcoaching.wordpress.com if you're interested in looking at my programs at some point. And today I'm really, really happy to welcome a guest that I very recently met in my life, though I feel like I've known her for a really long time. I'm going to read the description that she gave me. So today we're going to be speaking with Ann Liu, who was born in Los Angeles of a Chinese mother under false papers and 8th of 9 children of a laundryman, raised to be silent by tradition in the 1950s. She knew America as a foreigner and her parents' homeland as an unmentionable sleeping giant. Now, after living 7 decades, Ann has found her voice to speak out about systemic racism in America and her experience of knowing a fully diverse and inclusive community from her experience of teaching students with hearing loss in Alhambra in LA. Ann, thank you so much for being here today and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
I'm glad, my honor. I was so struck by how you shared how much you learned from working with hearing impaired people with hearing loss, deaf community. But before we open that discussion, could you share with us your names, Ann, Liu, and then I know they're spelled differently.
I know my license plate on our big car says LEW loves LIU, and that's why we have Liu, because my maiden name is LEW. Anyone who knows anything about China would know from the spelling what part of China my parents came from, my place of origin. LEW, Loliu, in Toisan, a form of Cantonese, came from southern China, Guangzhou, where a lot of labor where a lot of labor came from southern China for the gold rush during the mining period and the railroads. My husband's name, Liu, Xiang Liu, sounds different, but the transcribers spelled it Liu because of the tonal change. from northern China. So my husband's family is from the north, and my family is from the south. So I'm a Lulu.
Wonderful. I think it's just so fascinating to learn about names and where they come from, and especially if people are aware of what they mean and the associations connected with them. So that's wonderful that you have all the information.
So I thought my identity, when I think of who I am, I think everybody's identity is very deeply rooted in their first 10 years of their lives, right? How they were treated, how we saw the world when we began. So I told you when I began, I was taught to be silent. It was by tradition, especially girls were told not to talk, to always be respectful, and to mind who we were and let the boys go first. Even in my family of 9 kids, the boys had the steak and we had the crumbs. It was just tradition. And I think I have become a fighter since then for women's rights, because it isn't what I agree with today. Everyone deserves to be on a level playing field.
How many siblings, how many brothers did you have, and how many sisters did you have?
So there were 3 brothers, 5 girls, and then 1 brother. And I was the 5th Chinese daughter. And to be the 5th Chinese daughter, I was amazed. In high school was the first time I saw any children's literature with a Chinese person in it. And the title of the book was 5th Chinese Daughter. And it was written by someone who grew up in San Francisco, Chinatown. It meant a lot to have someone in literature that looked and sounded like you, that shared a history. So when Amy Tan started writing and was very well received with Joy Luck Club and many of her other books, I went crazy. I was so thrilled. It made me laugh so hard because she could poke fun at how she was told to be quiet too. That was just part of the tradition. And the idea of being a model minority, that we were representing the whole continent of China. You know, I remember my little brother skateboarding in the streets and my father warning him to really behave himself, because we were the only non-whites in that neighborhood that first year. In 3 years, the whole white neighborhood became minority. But that first year, he used to play on his skateboard, and my father told him, "No one's seen Chinese. You are representing the Chinese race." That's pretty heavy duty, isn't it?
That's immense pressure. Immense pressure.
So being a model minority is a very difficult myth, and it's a false myth that many Asians have to face. Oh, you must be really smart, or you go to the Ivy League schools because you're so smart. That's not true. The diversity with Asians is just so wide that it is unfair to judge a person by their skin.
No matter what, even if people think it's a positive stereotype and if people think it's a compliment, it's still throwing people in a box.
So later, when I speak of the students I taught with hearing loss and the color of their skin, all varied. It didn't matter. It was so inclusive and inspiring. So let me go back to how I began, and soon I'll show you some pictures, if I may.
Yes, I'm ready.
Because I lived a long time, 7 decades, and I was born in 1947. My mother came in 1939. From 1939 to 1947, there were 7 more kids. she had a baby almost every year, if not two.
Mm.
We are, my siblings are so close in age. Only my first brother was born in China, and people might not know why. It was because my mother could not come to the United States legally. As in the introduction says, she had to come illegally. In fact, I remember we had a mail bowl in our house, and in the mail bowl, I remember a very threatening letter written to my mother, Sui Wen Lu, and it was from the Department of Immigration and Naturalization. And the letter, this is way when I was young, and it charged my mother for being an illegal alien, because aliens was the term used for non-citizens coming to the United States. It was terrible, because to think of your mother as an alien was hurtful and shameful. I would not tell any of my friends that my mother was considered illegal or even alien. And there's a historic reason for that. And many people don't understand the why Chinese are spoken of separately from Asians when we talk about racialization in the 1800s. The Chinese were the first racial group, period, that were prevented from entering the United States. Blacks were taken as slaves. They were forced over. Native Americans lived here. They were the original inhabitants. But for immigrants, Chinese were the first group to be blocked from entering the United States, except for a chosen few. And those chosen few were diplomats, merchants, scholars. Any other than that could not come easily. And these three groups could bring their wives. By bringing the wives, it meant that they could come and establish a family here. So growing a family here was very limited, because there weren't that many Chinese diplomats and merchants coming. The majority of working class who came could not bring their wives. My father came, and back then they could be miners. Okay, the railroad got finished around 1885. There were miners, but when gold became very precious, Chinese were not allowed to mine. And so the occupations were cooking, because the miners didn't have time to cook meals. They were busy mining, and they didn't have time to wash their clothes. In fact, miners even earned the money and could pay with their gold to have their dirty laundry sent to Hawaii and back, washed and cleaned and folded.
Wow.
My father was a laundryman, and he could not bring his wife, my mother. And the only way he could do that was maneuvering the system. You got to beat the system when it makes it so difficult. It wasn't like he was a bad man. He wanted his wife here. And if he were just to bring the woman as an individual, she would have to be medically examined 3 times. Once in Hong Kong by the British doctor, one on the boat before coming off the boat, and then one by American. And that's very, very embarrassing and intimidating. And so a lot of men didn't want their women to have to face such degrading treatment. So the first Chinese here were mostly bachelors. My father, he worked really hard, and he managed to get my mother over here without that terrible medical exam. as the wife of a merchant.
Hmm.
And he came, my mother came as this other man's wife, and she already had my oldest brother, and she couldn't bring him as the son of this man, but she had to, my father had to arrange that he was the son of another man. And that's the first picture that I wanted to share. The first picture is, I believe, in 1939 or 1940. And it's in front of if that can be shown, it's in front of the family laundry. That family laundry was built by hand, brick by brick. You can see the foundation there.
Oh, wow.
And my father is the one in the white t-shirt.
Okay. Leaning against the wall.
Leaning against the wall. The man sitting there is the supposedly her husband.
I
The
see.
two men. And that's why I chose this picture to show, because it shows this immigration law that lasted for 61 years.
Wow.
From 1882, and it was not repealed until 1943. And it was repealed only because the United States was at war in World War II and needed China as an ally. And so when it was repealed, it wasn't, okay, all of them can come over who wants to come. No, they were given a token number of 105. So in that large of a country, and almost 1 billion people, to be allowed only 105 to go to the United States, it definitely had the message of don't come and establish families. There were laws against miscegenation, where if a white woman fell in love with a Chinese man, she would lose her citizenship. If a Chinese man Chinese men couldn't marry a white woman. It was just not allowed. There was intermarriage with other minorities, with Latinos and with indigenous. But I don't know of any. There weren't that many. The men formed bachelor benevolent societies by last names. And so, of course, ours was the Liu Consolidated Benevolent Society, maybe 3 last names, maybe Yi or Lao. And people with those last names then would support each other with loans, with information because of the language, with schooling, forming schooling. Of course, the first schooling I remember was the Presbyterian Chinese school. So that was the early beginning. If I can show that, if you would show that first picture again, I'll talk to you a little bit about my sibling. Oh, wait. Oh, okay. Okay, this one is kind of interesting here. All those children, because my mother came when she was 35. And that was the first time she came to the States. Okay. My father actually came to the States 2 times. And I think he was a pretty fast learner, because I saw some pictures of him being kind of like a dandy, where he was kind of dressed kind of spiffy. I think he came and worked hard, earned himself some prestige, and he got around because eventually he became president of the Consolidated Society, and he became a civic leader. My brothers, right here, my mother came when 1939. The second little boy with to my father's left by the elbow was born in 1940. So babies right away. About 10 months later was the younger brother to his at the end. And then all the other little kids, the one in the little baby seat,
Mm-hmm.
and all the other ones are my 4 older sisters.
Ah.
Mm-hmm. I wasn't born yet. Working in the laundry was really hard work. It was actually the first commercial laundry in Los Angeles.
Wow.
It is historic, but now it's torn down.
Mm.
It was like 6 blocks east of San Pedro between 7th and 8th Street. So right in the heart of downtown, where there used to be a Chinatown at the Union Station, LA Union Station. And my husband just went and gave a remembrance talk about the 18 Chinese who were lynched at that, where the present Union Station is. There was a massacre of Chinese 150 years ago in 1871. This is the history of systemic racism that was not born today. This is a racism that is so much deeply implanted in the way society lives that people don't even realize that they may be participating in something that is racist. Let's show another picture.
That's very well put.
So our first, the next picture was my grandmother. I saw it. So my father had 3 other brothers, and it was a mark of achievement to be able to bring his mother, along with his brothers, to bring his mother from China. This is huge, 1954. To be able to bring the mother, it was only very, very few could do that. And so it actually was in the LA Times, and there was a huge reception at Castellar School, an elementary school outside of Chinatown, where there were roasted pigs celebrating her 80th birthday. She came with very small feet. Her feet were bound. Females had their feet bound from the early age of like age 4 or 5. These little girls would be crying all the time because their feet hurt. They were bound to be like size 3, at the most size 4 shoe size. And the toes would continue to grow, but grow under the foot. So when my grandmother came, she walked very slowly, and the doctor actually amputated her toes. And as a child, I remember going into the bedroom and seeing her toes in glass jars. And when she died, I remember she was buried with her toes.
Oh, wow.
Why were girls' feet bound? It was a very sexist move. This was a very patriarchal society. China, in that, for a long time, from Confucius on, all the way until around the 1910s, then women became more liberated. Girls' feet were bound so they could not run away, so they could not walk far from the home where they were bound to work, clean, and cook. That was the woman's duty. And the men were expected to go and work and bring home the money. My grandmother was thrilled to pieces because she had 4 sons, and all 4 sons were here in the United States sending money back. And so when she came, I am sure she had a lot of praise from fellow Chinese in China telling how lucky she was to have these 4 sons,
Mm.
to have her brought over. In fact, my cousins and some of my siblings have gone back, and the house is a poor rickety wooden 2-story. But back then, times were hard. To have even a house of that height, a 2-story house, was prestigious. But the family pictures are still there on the mantle.
Wow.
Let's talk about the next picture. Time's going to go fast. I haven't gotten past being 10 years old. The next
Good.
picture, my siblings were born in the laundry that I showed you, that Mandarin laundry. There was an upstairs rickety staircase that went up, and they were all born in there. Oh, except for my second brother, who was born actually in the first house. But after the laundry, and this was a very proud picture. I think it's just beautiful. I'm not born in that one yet. I'm the 8th of 9 kids. The next picture, my mother was pregnant there probably with me, and they were all dressed up, the 4 uncles and the 4 aunts with all the cousins. We were very close. The family, what do you call it? The family circle was just really, really strong. The brothers, having immigrated here, bringing their wives, they were all dressed up for my 4th aunt's wedding. The next picture. This is an interesting picture. I haven't downloaded the picture of my elementary school, but I did go to the school, West Vernon Avenue in Los Angeles. It's about 1 mile away from the present Coliseum in Los Angeles, around the USC area. Maybe some people might know that, or Exposition Park. We lived on the corner of Hill Street and Santa Barbara. And Santa Barbara is now called Martin Luther King Boulevard. We lived at the end of the Harbor Freeway. Now the Harbor Freeway goes far, but I wanted to point out in that picture the racial diversity. We lived in a immigrant, Black, you see a few Chinese, a few white, but it was a neighborhood going under transition. It used to be white. It used to be the outskirts of Los Angeles proper. But as more people came into Los Angeles, whites moved out, Blacks moved in, and Latinos. Then our family moved to a white area, Crenshaw and Slauson. And then in 3 years, it became a minority. And this was the house where I was born. Okay, next picture.
So all born.
And this is my present family. I've been in the way past, and this is maybe just last year, just before the pandemic. And I think it's kind of amazing the transition between all Chinese family generation to this next generation. I married Chinese. Of my 9 of the 9 kids, only one married not Chinese or not Asian, and she married Irish, and now every family branch has an Irishman, and so I have my Irish grandchildren over here, and I'm carrying my little Irish Ada, and the one behind her, she's Irish Chinese, and that's my baby, my youngest daughter behind me. And then behind, you see my son, Stephen. His wife is behind him. She's from Wyoming, and she just had a baby boy later that year.
Oh.
And on his back are the children of my first daughter, who's behind Stephen. And she married Israeli. And so that they speak a little bit of Hebrew and a little bit of Chinese. And then way in the front, my husband, and then way in the front is my second daughter, and she married Mexican with a little bit of indigenous, and the 2 in the front. And I just love this inclusion, and I think that's the theme of this show, right? Becoming enjoying the preciousness of having a larger mix so that we aren't in little bubbles and we have this very welcoming family group. And it's just been wonderful. I've been talking so much. You might have a whole long list of questions.
Well, very, very interesting. Thank you so much for providing the pictures and introducing us to your family. And it's so interesting because America is such a mix of like so many horrific pieces of history and laws like discriminating and stopping and blocking. I mean, on the foundation of near German genocide and enslaving people. And it's also the same country where there is so much opportunity to have a family like yours, right? The mixture of
Yes.
different people. So it's just such a it's just so fascinating. And
So it was a slow transition, where I was initially began thinking of the world, as a child, thinking of the world as bakwe, which are whites. In Chinese, they were white ghosts. And the blacks were called hakwe, which are, it's derogatory if I think about it now, but that's the way I heard my parents.
in a lot of languages.
Yeah, in a lot of languages, they have racism built into the language where you see each other by color, right? Where, like in my family, they loved my husband because he was so fair skinned. How we can judge people just by their color. I think if having a show like this, talking about that, making us more aware, maybe out there might be an immigrant child who has never seen maybe an Asian adult being more now where it's seen. But when I was young, I never saw an Asian model as a adult talking about their life experience. It wasn't until I was in a junior in high school that I even had a teacher who was Asian. I went to Catholic school, and then I went to a public school in the summertime, and I had a Mr. Matsuda teaching world literature. And it was like my whole world opened when I was able to read world literature and not just read European literature. I mean,
Yes.
that's the statement. If the curriculum in a school is only studying European history, or the large part of it doing that, it says something about how you can value yourself. When I was a child, I would turn beet red if even the word China or Chinese were mentioned. I was so embarrassed because in the schools did not even acknowledge China as a country. It was the sleeping giant. You might see it on a globe, but I could not learn anything about China in schools. And that's why when they talk about ethnic studies now, it's not to is to learn a more balanced, a real history of the world, so every person can understand the intersections that inevitably happen when we're all living on one earth. So the sleeping giant. Yeah, when I was growing up in that old house you saw, there was a picture of Chiang Kai-shek, who was the leader for the Chinese who immigrated. And only when Mao Zedong changed the class lines in China did our family start to accept that communism was not altogether bad, because my parents only saw starvation at the time that they left China. And so understanding a person's history is important. Recognizing another person's history is acknowledging the other as important as you are. And I think we need to do that. as respectful humans. That's truly loving your neighbor, when you respect your neighbor for who they are.
And if I can underscore, we have great news locally that our school board just accepted, right? Just passed. It was a lot of work and a lot of years, and felt like way too late. And it started decades ago in other parts of California, but it's a huge positive that we just got accepted.
Yes, it's a positive that Davis has for the Unified School District to put into plan. I think it's going to happen in 2030. It's going to take a while for it to take action. And that's like 9 more years of students not knowing that balanced history. And so there's got to be ways for filling in this big gap before ethnic studies is actually taught. My personal view is ethnic studies viewpoint should be integrated into all history programs and not taught as so much as a separate class. Oh, I'm going to go learn about.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you.
Yeah, that would be healthier, I think, than to think, oh, now we are going to go study the other.
Because then people, when we grow up without that exposure, and there are a lot of like really good people who are not exposed, and so whose consciousness isn't inclusive because of like conditioning, right? And it's not, and we can luckily reprogram and recondition ourselves, and that's what I that's what my website's all about. There are different ways to do it, but it's just trying to compensate for the lack of exposure we grew up with. I grew up mostly in America, not entirely, but it was so frustrating. And I really appreciated when you talked about Amy Tan, because I, and at the beginning of the show, and how much that meant to you, of course, and how much it means to you just seeing a teacher who is reflecting your family, or where your family came from, or at least a part of the world where your family came from. It means so much to children, like not even all necessarily consciously, but there's just something so validating to see reflections of yourself.
Yes.
And to read in books. And that's why when at the top of the show I said I feel like it's the best form of education I had, was being able to live in different places, even though the circumstances weren't always happy. Why and when we had to move, I always got to meet different people, and sometimes different languages, and that's like, there's nothing that compares to that in my experience as far as learning.
A living experience. I like what you said, where you're having people. What was it? Starts with a C. The word just slipped. Where people become connected to the other, to the history. And my husband is teaching an ethnic studies class right now for OLLI. That's the Osher lifelong life learning.
Yes.
Through UC Davis.
Mm-hmm.
And so he has a group of adults learning about ethnic studies now. And the most common response to it is, I never knew that. I never knew that. Constant, I never knew that. And people are just amazed. Like when George Floyd died, we started these Tuesday talks on Zoom, and we had up to 100 people meet with us on Zoom. He would give a little lesson on systemic racism, and then people had a chance to talk, because I think it's important people have a chance to talk. Mm-hmm. We did do that Waking Up White discussion too. Mm-hmm. And like the Waking Up White, I think when you were speaking, it made me remember that I really wanted to mention sensibility. as I was living in Orange County, which for quite a long time was a very white community, and then it became very diverse, so much so that Katie Porter was elected in our district. But before that, it wouldn't have happened. Sensibility is different from just learning about another person's culture or background. Sensibility is really being aware of the other's practices, values, customs. For example, what I really missed, and this sounds kind of crazy, we went, Davis is fairly white compared to where we came from in Irvine.
Mhm.
Irvine wasn't always white, mixed, but it became very diverse by the time we moved out of Irvine. So when we moved here, it was largely white. I work at Grace Garden as leader for the day, and all the adults are, except when I started, were white, and all the volunteers were diverse. They were coming in from the university. Nobody mentioned anything, but I was very aware of that. If you're a person of color, you're very aware that you are not like everybody else, even though I have been told, and you're just like one of us. And it kind of takes me aback because I am not like one of you. We share some things, but I want to be recognized not as different, but that I grew up different.
Mhm.
And some of the things, my experiences were because I was a person of color.
Mhm.
All right. So these sensibilities, I think, are really important. When I went up to Seattle to visit my first daughter during this pandemic period, you know how we've been all holed in to our homes.
Mhm.
I went into H Market in Seattle, just north of where she lived. And H Market is a Korean-owned grocery store. And just a big, big grocery store, all Asian foods and fruits and vegetables to Asian style cooking. When I walked in there, I started to cry.
Mhm.
It had been so long since
Mhm.
I heard that music that they play. It's not elevator music, but it's had an Asian flavor to the music.
Mhm.
And to be among people that look like you meant a lot. I don't know. It's not being racist. It's just like wanting some identity, being aware of who you are. And so my neighbor actually brought over a book the other night and it said H Mart. And it's a New York bestseller.
Ah.
So it was sensibility that I wanted to make sure I would bring up because there's been a lot of talk about redlining. I won't talk about that because I think people are more aware of that now. And a lot of laws that have discriminated against people of color. I think I just wanted to tell my personal story, and it's like I see the title of the show, live. It's your voice. To me, I read it and it says, "Live your voice," because I grew up being very quiet, being very because that's the way I was taught to be. And when actually, when I became a master gardener, I went through Toastmasters and learned to use my voice much stronger and not to hesitate and say and so like that.
Uh-huh.
And it taught me to speak more strongly. And now I feel really whole. I've gone through Deepening the Sage Within series with a group with Marianne, and it's been wonderful. And so it's not just getting older, because everybody can get old, but not everybody can sage.
Nice distinction. Wisdom. Well, let me let you know we have just 4 minutes left, and did you want to talk? I just love it. We were able to have a conversation a few days ago, and you were talking so much about how much you learned from how inclusive the deaf community was. And
Yes.
did you want to just
Yes.
do a shout out to
I
that?
saved it for the last because it's probably one of the treasured times of my life, of my career as a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing. I taught some students as preschoolers, and then as they grew up, I had them again in high school. And they still put me in Facebook. I'm really bad about doing Facebook, but they said, Ann Lou. They named me Ann Lou. They didn't call me Mrs. Lou. They called me Ann Lou. Ann Lou. They like the sound, Ann Lou. And they tell me about their children, their memories. A lot of them cross-raced and married. Parents, I always treasure Joey's mother writing me when Joey graduated from high school, saying how difficult it was for her to face having a son with hearing loss.
Hmm.
But as he grew up, she realized how perfect he really was.
Oh.
And she thanked me for it. I saved that letter. In fact, I was cleaning some of the stuff I moved here to Davis with, and that's a letter I saved. Letters from parents, letters from students, knowing that in some way we touched their lives and helped them go forward with their lives a little bit stronger, and that I was at a point in their lives that helped to make a difference. I think that's what we're all here for, right? And so you have made a difference for many, Bahia.
Well, I have learned so much from you. I honest to goodness, I am loving that I'm going to learn every single day of my life, hopefully. And I really do find these conversations enriching. And thank you for everything that you just exposed me to. And one thing, now I have a dream of you expanded my consciousness of having if this is the proper way to say it, an interpreter of ASL for people who watch the viewing. I know we have listeners and we have viewers. And so thank you for helping expand my awareness and my consciousness and to put my mind.
And your sensibility. That's the
Thank
word I was trying to remember. Consciousness and sensibility.
Okay, sensibility. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Oh gosh, my pleasure. So I also want to thank our sound engineer Roxy and our producer Dean and Melissa Marino, who introduced you to me.
Yes, my professor.
And to all the listeners and the viewers, and be sure to tune in next Wednesday if you're listening, W4CY Radio, and you can view on Talk 4 TV. And we'll see you next Wednesday at 8 p.m.
Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech